talk about when you were growing up and you were playing video games, for those that do. You ever notice the difference between the older generation consoles and the newer generation consoles? The graphics on the newer gen consoles have really improved to the point where it's almost like you can reach into the screen, and as creepy as this is, it's almost like you can touch the character or feel what the character is feeling. And it just seems a little too realistic. It's like it's almost like virtual reality has become a reality, but it's not. And when I see this, and I see newer technology come out, like recently, I've been hearing about this technology called the Oculus, and it's like this it's like this virtual headband device that you wear, and it's like you're literally seeing what your avatar is seeing, and as you turn, it turns. And I'm just sort of wondering, if you can do that with a headband, can you make gloves that would interact with this headband, so you could actually have the sensation that you're actually touching, or even be able to when you move your hands, you could actually see your hands move in the virtual world. I would like to see what the newer gen consoles and say the next 10 years would be able to come up with in regards to something like that, because I, as a consumer, I would spend a lot of money doing that, as in buying something like that, because it'd be really beneficial, because then I wouldn't have to, everything that I would do within a video game would be all hands-on. Like if I had to pick up a gun, or if I had to pick up a sword and shield, which I don't know about the animations. I mean, I'm sure it would have to be customized for each user, but that would make the gameplay all more interesting, and the graphics, I'm sure, would be so advanced that it would look just realistic. So essentially, even though you would be able to see through your character's eyes, you could probably also have a mode to still see in third person, and where you would look, your avatar would look, and you would still be able to move around. So, that would be quite the advancement, and I would really like to see that within the next 10 years. And even if it came out before then, within, say, the next 5 years, that would even be terrific. I mean, we're advanced enough right now that if they can make a prototype, and they can have it at conventions like PAX or I want to say PAX is a good example. I just really think that, that kind of technology people could benefit from it, because then you wouldn't have to necessarily pick up a controller. You know, granted, you know, controller is hands-on, but when you have to pick up a controller regardless, it's just it just seems very limited to the functionality of what you can do. Because obviously with the controller, yeah, with the press of a button, you know, you can pull a pin and throw it. But the interaction, I mean, things like the Kinect, you know, yeah, you know, it can really sense certain limitations, but with something like the Oculus, it would really be beneficial, because then you would get a full-on interaction, especially if it had some type of sensoring gloves. I'm not just talking about one glove like the old Nintendo Power Glove that they used to have. I'm talking something really advanced. And, well, I suppose if they had boots that could do that, like, even then, when you wore them, it would sense the footsteps, so you know the faster you would be stepping, you could go full run or you could walk. But the cost and the efficiency of it, well, I think that would just depend on whatever company is developing it. So it's just something I would like to see. I know over the years, the newer generation consoles, they're probably going to lean more towards social networking and playing as a community, and I'm not so sure I agree with the direction that they're taking the newer consoles. I mean, yeah, the graphics are better, I'm sure the gameplay will be better, I'm sure there'll be a lot of great games, but when it comes down to it, you know, I don't want to sit there and have to pick up a controller and press share, and, you know, it's like, if I wanted to share my gameplay with someone, that should be optional. It shouldn't be all the time. And as far as like with some consoles having DRM, like SimCity tried doing, I'm not really enthused with that idea. Simply because all the great games that I have played in the past, it's like the incident with the PS2 and the PS3. Or even the original PS with the PS3. You can't, I mean, it ticks me off that with some versions of the PS3, you can't play your PS2 games on your PS3 without modifying it or without breaking the terms of service or doing something illicit. And granted, I still have my PS2 for that very reason, so I can play my PS2 games on it. But I shouldn't have to sit there and buy a console for each generation of game. They should just come out with a console that is universal, that will eventually play all games on it. And as far as this idea of DRMing, I don't like that idea, because all it does is cause limitations. And it just seems like the developers are not really listening to the gamers, and it seems like the ones that they are listening to are only posing as gamers, but in reality, they're trolling. They're trying to make the gaming experience for most gamers degrading and downfalling. So the actual gaming experience itself is just degraded, and you won't enjoy the games, and therefore you won't buy them, and businesses will lose money. And then they can sit there and say, oh, well, those businesses didn't do a good job with developing their games, or because they had DRM, and you know what? It's not the business's fault for doing that. It's the people that those businesses are listening to. And the way I see it is the developers should be listening to the gamers and not take... Some advice is good, but when you start listening to everyone, it starts to really degrade the sense of the game. And granted, you can't make everyone happy, but I have been playing games since 1989. Pretty much the year of my surgery. And I would have to say that out of all the years of my video gaming experience, not just from computers, all the way from computers, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, all the way up to the PS3, the Xbox 360, I mean, just everything in between, even the Atari 2600. I've played those, and I've played a Jaguar, I could go on, the list goes on, but regardless, it just seems like when it comes to games, the newer the game is, it seems like, for example, you take a role-playing game, and it seems like each generation of that role-playing game is degraded in some form as the newer generation comes along, and they have their demands and their wants, and when they start making all these requests, for the developers, and sometimes the developers will listen to those newer generation people versus the previous generation. It just seems like the newer generation really degrades what the older generation players have strived for. And some change is good, but when you get too much of change and you try to mesh the old with the new, things don't quite match up, and there isn't a consistency of features, and that's really been a real problem, because when you take features from one generation to another, you have a, I want to say, a non-consistency with how things match up. You take a storyline, and it doesn't quite match up. I mean, there are some games that, yeah, the storyline is fleshed with each other from previous to the sequel, but it's only because the developers decided to make it that way. And when they sit there and they have to write all that code, and it just doesn't necessarily bode well in the gamer community, because then you've got the older generation gamers saying that this game sucks or that this game is no good, and the newer generation are like, oh yeah, we like this game, because really they haven't been around long enough to know the game's quality. They're just basically picking up off where we left off at, and they don't know the full story. It's like reading half a book and they've only read the end half, where we've read the first half. So really what I think needs to be said for that is they need to make a console that can play both halves of that book or that game. I mean, you take a role-playing game and you take Final Fantasy 13, you take Final Fantasy 13-2, you take Final Fantasy 13-2 or 3, 13-3, and you know, it seems to leave off, but there are certain variations or certain differences that have occurred within that Final Fantasy series, and it's just I mean, that's just an example. So another good example is you take Dragon Age, you take your Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age Awakening, and then you look at Dragon Age 2. It's the same universe, but it's like two different stories have been told, and it doesn't quite match up. Now, when Dragon 3 Inquisition does come out, I'm going to play it, and I'm going to see how it works out, but you know, I just really want to see, I really want to see them come up with a console that is universal, that everyone can enjoy, and that everyone will get a little something out of it, and there won't be any bickering or arguing. I mean, even in the concept of for the trolling enjoyment, you know, it's like when I say a little something for everyone, I mean everyone, and that includes, yes, that even includes the trolls, you know, so they can have some enjoyment out of it as well. So I just really think that, you know, that's the way the evolution of gaming should go, and in order to do that, they really need a powerful enough processor, not just graphically, but CPU. They really need more advancements in technology in order to do that, and that may take another 10 years. Could take another 5 years, but the way I see it, I think it'll be another 10 years before that happens. I mean, it seems like every year when these conventions roll around, yeah, they're coming up slowly but surely. They're coming up with technology, and here's something to be said about that as well. You know, when you advance technology too quickly, sometimes people don't have time to adjust to it. And the ones that aren't able to adjust to it or keep up to it, it's like, well, it's like certain things just don't mesh up. So until that really takes place, you know, I'm just going to have to say that, you know, it will take a while for technology to really expand on. like I had thought. That's just my take on the newer generation consoles and technology, and as far as even when it comes to gaming. I mean, every year they come up with new games and they come out with new consoles. I wouldn't say every year, but it's like every 4 to 5 years regardless. And when they do come up with these consoles, there's always something lacking with them. And it's like why should I have to give up a little bit of the old console for something new that doesn't quite match my consumer needs? Not wants, needs. It's like the PS3. As I said before, the much old first version of the PS3, they had a option where you could play your PS2 games on there. Now with the certain serial numbers on the PS3, which, I mean, this is old information. It's been around a while, but regardless, it's like, why should I have to have two consoles to play all the great games that I like? And I shouldn't have to rebuy the games in order to play them. I mean, if you have a disc there and it's got the information on the disc, and the disc is good and not scratched, and and you actually purchased the disc and the information and software, and you went into a retailer, you should be able to do that. I mean, if it's in your hand and at one point in time you had the receipt, you bought it. It's yours. I just really think that they need to come up with a console that can play that. And even in the sense of universal, if companies really want gamers to buy their products so badly, they need to come up with a universal console that will do that. And I mean, the only universal console that I know that's capable of doing that right now is a computer. I hate to break it to everyone, but a computer is like the most universal you're going to get. So, I mean, if you want to just come up with a strict gaming console that's universal, then that's what I can say for that. But I just really think that it's going to take a while. And I'm sure not everyone's going to agree with what I'm saying, but sooner or later they'll come around and they'll see that that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a lot of advancement before anything of that sort will happen. That's all I really have to say about that. So, thank you for watching, and keep watching for the next video. Thanks again.